if you're looking for ammunition for why you need to manage sprawl, then this is probably a great place to start. If you're just looking for a better understanding of like what are we addressing, then this is also a really great point to discuss.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
Now, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I'll definitely hit a bunch of them for you for reference. On ineffective naming, one of the challenges isn't, just like inappropriate name usage or obvious things like that. One of the big ones is that people name things based on general terms. So they might create something called management, and that management site could be management for sales, it could be management for HR, it could be management for a number of different things. And when someone creates a team with that name, no one else can create a team with that name. So now you might have someone else who says, well, this is Teams management or other very ambiguous names. And that creates a lot of confusion around what's the workspace, or in this case, the Microsoft Teams purpose. And it also makes it really difficult to tell what's official versus unofficial. You can't differentiate at a glance. So I think those ineffective naming things are actually more prominent than, just the obvious ones of people, using a poor naming choice for their structure. Now, there's other issues with owners. I really want to talk about, there's obvious ones like if an owner leaves the organization, they're no longer associated with that team, and so there's an owner gap, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But besides those kinds of typical life cycle considerations, there's also this issue of sponsor versus owner. A lot of organizations, the person who can make a decision on who should have access, who shouldn't, or whether a site or team should be archived or kept, it's not maybe the actual technical owner who might be just acting as the owner from a technical perspective. It might be a business sponsor or somebody else that makes the most sense to escalate that request to. And so without having that extra metadata, without having that extra insight, it makes it really challenging for us to manage that. Not to mention, as I mentioned earlier, private channels have their own issues. You can absolutely have private channels where the owner of a Microsoft team is not at all a member of the private channel. And what that means is, even though the owner of the Microsoft team owns the team, right? They're responsible for the team, accountable, et cetera. They can't really be if they don't have access or visibility of some of these private channels, right? And those are all sorts of issues for archiving, deletion, all sorts of break rules from a technical perspective as well. So this owners thing is a little bit more dense than just, do we have two owners, right? A backup and a primary for every single team and site. And then if we take the discussion around inconsistencies and things like that, we can actually see that there's a lot of redundancy. One of the big problems is that because each team or workspace often isn't templated or designed consistently, it starts from a place where they're all different, right? That each owner or creator makes them a little bit tweaked differently, or they're not designed optimally, right, based on the request or the need that came up. This increases operational load because if you're managing these environments, you really don't know what's different. So it means that, figuring out how to do cost transfers and revenue allocations and things like that to the different things internally to manage these costs becomes really challenging. It's also worth noting that it increases support because, you don't have things to rely on where there's consistency, even on the app side, right, on what integration points and other things exist often within these environments. So, governance isn't just about the provisioning, creation, and management of these environments, it's also controls. And that leads to decreased user confidence because if each team feels very different and I keep finding these orphaned or redundant teams, then I start to really question whether or not this platform with all these empty collections is really relevant or people are really using it, et cetera. And this creates all sorts of issues for adoption. Now, the data loss one and loss of control are very important. And one of the reasons I like to highlight this is if you've ever actually implemented information protection, so like if I want to implement labels that protect documents and content, or I want to have retention rules with supervised disposition and things like that, you can't do that effectively without metadata. Essentially, if I don't know what department or other attributes of a team or a SharePoint site exist, it's really difficult for me to say, well, apply this rule to all HR content in the organization, because you don't know where those HR collections are. But if we asked, a simple question like, does this team, or does this site relate to HR? And someone said, yep, department equals HR. Now we can actually do targeting when we apply labels with rules and other types of approaches, where we can actually target and apply greater levels of protection or greater levels of monitoring or other things to those particular collections. And that's really important, because otherwise you kind of treat everything as unstructured data, or you maybe have the intranet versus everything else, and that becomes really problematic if you really want to do this well, right? If you want to implement information protection and retention and lifecycle management properly at scale. Another big one here is it's very difficult to associate risk, right? One of the big questions that's missing that you often want to ask is, not necessarily what the confidentiality level of the space should be, because maybe users can't make that decision, but is this going to contain highly confidential or secret or other kinds of information? And if someone responds yes to that, then even if we don't necessarily apply a bunch of rules to it, we certainly want to manage the risk around that collection more effectively, right? We might want to do proactive motions like permissions review that we ask the owner of that collection to do on a regular basis. So these workspaces, they really need these extra efforts, and it's very difficult to do that targeting, again, without knowing, what are all the ones that have a risk of confidentiality or things of that nature. Another great example of this is if we take the slower team start ones, because the design of these spaces is so inconsistent, it also means that we can't really improve them all at once. So think about it this way: if you actually made it so each project collection, Microsoft Team or project site or project online associated and integrated collection was integrated by default, that would make a pretty compelling experience. And in fact, we may be able to update all of the existing collections with a new feature, new capability that enriches the experience. But you can't do that if you don't know what all the project sites are, right? If you don't know what the dependable structures of those sites are as well, right? There's no reliability there. And it also creates this really real issue of hesitation. What you find is when users get these sort of default spaces, most users don't change them, whether it's a SharePoint site and the page and the web parts on it, or whether it's creating their own channels, because they don't have confidence in the tool. They don't know, should I change this? Is this a good idea? Should it be a channel? Should it be another team? I don't know. And because they don't know, it either leads them to making poor choices because they're missing key information, or it leads to them never optimizing that space, and then everything becomes in the general channel. Or you have these SharePoint sites that the homepage, the most useful page within the site, really never gets adapted to the needs of that team. And so those are huge adoption and efficiency misses. And it also makes this important because if we look at navigation, as I mentioned earlier, the out-of-the-box experiences really are poor for navigating hundreds of different sites and teams. And when we have that need, we need to create experiences that enable that. If you don't know what what department, site, or team relates to, it's really difficult to be able to give people a view in that department landing page, say for your intranet, where you can see all of the sites for that, or to create a directory experience, or to do other things that we'll talk about later today. It's also really important to understand that what you really see is that there's a hidden cost where users often are doing all the linking. So essentially, because you don't have effective navigation, because you have such a big sprawl issue, users say, no, don't use this link, use this link. And then they're passing links back and forth. And all of this activity that they're doing is just burned and wasted time that could be much better if we had a better solution in the first place. Now, there's of course discussions on when to use what. That's a big challenge when you don't have pre-allocated or pre-designed spaces. We can help users by providing them the right kind of space. They might not know that they shouldn't create another team, that they could actually use a channel for what they're trying to do. And then that might lead to better productivity, better efficiencies, better management, better security, and other things like that. This also creates more consistency because you can rely on, oh, we created this kind of space, so you can do drip campaigns and other kinds of things. You can essentially email and proactively reach out to users and give them the adoption materials as an just-in-time approach, right? You created this new space. Hey, you've had it for a month. Here, if you haven't looked at it, there's some usage data. There's other things you might not be aware of that you can utilize in this space that can help you optimize and improve it. And this all leads into better identification of champions and other things as well. Because again, you can have all sorts of site owners, but if you don't know, which department or business unit or product group or client relationship or whatever has the associated, like where we have a gap in champions, who I can see as an owner, then that might actually help you understand that, oh, this is the right person that we should nominate into the champion program, or we should proactively reach out to bring into the fold. So there's other reasons that this is quite beneficial as well. So that was a few. There's way more we can go on. Lots of reasons why sprawl needs to be managed. And unmanaged sprawl is essentially when you allow the creation of Microsoft Teams and SharePoint sites through the out-of-the-box experience without governance or structure on the back end. Hey everyone, thanks again for making the time today. If you're watching the recording or attending the live webinar, I will warn you, I tend to talk pretty fast and the content's going to be pretty dense. The slides are already up, available on SlideShare, but the recording and other material can be grabbed from the Orchestry website as a follow-up.